our next speaker, which we have like a great advantage of seeing story from different perspectives, is coming from a very fresh perspective of learning and education. Kevin Cordi, Associate Professor and Professional Storyteller, will be joining us to share the lessons from classroom to the boardroom on how understanding the story with working in education helps us be more conscious about it when we talk about organizations. Kevin, I just gave you the hosting rights. Please join me on air. Just in case the text is in Russian on the platform, the button is on the upper right. It's yellow, and it should be a pop-up as usual. Let's give Kevin our fires while he is joining the platform so he can feel the warmth of our atmosphere. And by the way, thank you all for tuning in for the last part. It's the last favorite bit of the conference. Thank you all for being here and supporting us till the end. It's lovely. Kevin, welcome. Yay, you have the background too. Lovely. I cannot hear you yet. Your microphone is muted.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Perfect. All right. Welcome to the conference. I'm so happy to have you here. I'll be off the air. Let me know when you need the slides, and if anything else, I'll come back. So,
Artem, before you
have a great stay here. Yeah.
I just want to say it takes a lot to put a conference together, and I don't believe in distance learning. I believe in connected learning, and you have spent an unearthly amount of time connecting, whether it's translating or moving this story forward. So I'd like to move the fires to Artem in that direction.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. All right, I'll go blush in the background.
Well, let me start with something that might sound strange in a room full of business leaders. I've spent 30 plus years working in one of the most misunderstood storytelling environments in the world, a classroom. Not Hollywood, not marketing, not branding, a classroom. And here's what I learned. If the story doesn't work, nothing works. I've watched brilliant content fail. I've watched carefully designed lessons collapse. I've watched students capable, intelligent, curious, completely disengaged, not because they couldn't understand, but because they couldn't enter the story. I'm not the king of classroom management. I come from a big family, and I can handle a lot of noise. So I was trying to figure in my first year how to get them to pay attention. I said 6 words to my students, and they became attentive, recognized, and curious. And those words were, let me tell you a story. And then they began to bring their stories in the classroom, and it became part of the curriculum. So as a result of that, I now build from story. It's not a second idea. It is the first. It is the making tool of learning. And over time, I realized something that changed how I see everything. Story isn't how we decorate information. Story is how the brain decides what matters. And here's why that matters to you. Because in your organizations, your businesses, small or large, the same thing is happening every day. Strategies are being ignored. Values being memorized, but not activated. Data is being presented and forgotten. Misplaced time is spent on detached management strategies. Not because your people aren't smart, but because the story isn't working. So today I want to connect two worlds that don't talk nearly enough: education and business leadership. Because what great educators and great organizations have in common is this: they don't just deliver information, they shape the stories where people live and invite all voices in the making process. Let me show you what I mean. Here's a tension every one of us lives with. Dramatist Robert McKee said, "Stories are the most powerful tool in a leader's toolkit." Whereas a Swedish physician and statistician Hans Rosling said, "Numbers have an important story to tell. They rely on you to give them a voice." In education, I learned this the hard way. One of the high schools that I taught in California had the reputation of being rough. I was told it was gang community. When they heard the name, people said, "You teach there?" The story they told of their own school, or of the school that I'm hearing about and that I'm teaching at, was of challenge and even fear. I noticed even my students who were living in or being in that school echoed this. So I made an assignment. This is what teachers do. I asked students to tell me what signs they read when they walked to the school. They said the signs read, "Stay out, warning, stop signs, don't do this" signs. I explained, this is only one story. I invited them to walk from their place to the school and create a soundscape story of what we don't see, but they hear. Students shared the stories that come from deep listening. I heard they can hear Grandma Rose sipping her tea on the swing around porch. The boys playing catch with their dad, always at 7:30, right before school. The crossing guard in the quiet voice saying, "Please watch for the kids before crossing the streets." I explained to my students, these sounds tell a different story. Then I asked them, which one are you going to listen to? Why don't you listen to the sounds of your own story that's around you and that you live with every day, and you pay more attention to the people who visited the environment? What I thought those students initially needed was better information. What they needed was ways to make meaning, personal, contextualized meaning, connections using story. And in business, we make the same mistake. We think clarity comes from more data, more dashboard, more slides, but data doesn't decide. People do. And people decide based on the story they believe they're in. And in order for this to happen, it must be strategic. As one of the speakers said on the first day, Angela Sharma said in her book, Strategic Storytelling, a strategic story built with immense focus on whom the story is, a strategic story is built with immense focus on whom the story is for, and has the power to change storytelling outcomes for individuals and organizations. I ask you, are you, as business leaders, strategic in finding a place where your colleagues, your partners, and your customers fit in the story you're telling together? According to Ben Okri, we live in story the way fish live in water. However, even though it's all around, it's not a luxury, as Stephen Denning says. It's necessary for survival. In the classroom, there is no neutral space. I remember the greatest teaching day ever. I was outside in the hallway, and the janitor said, "Come here." And I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Come here, I want to show you what I got." I said, "Oh, okay. You listen to the janitor. That's the very first thing. Whether you're in business or wherever you are, the custodian owns the school or owns the business. You need to know that." And he said, "Look what I found." And I look, and there are little girls' clothing, like young children, very, very young children, There's notebooks and there's a yellow journal. And I pick it up and I begin to read this journal that's dated 7 years prior. And the bell has rang and the students are coming into the classroom. And I'm reading how this young lady in Bakersfield, California, where it's 113 degrees, is living on our roof part-time to avoid a boyfriend that beats her up and a father who doesn't listen. And I'm mesmerized by this journal. And my students, it's already 10 minutes into the classroom, say, Mr. Cordi, class has started. What are you doing? And I began to tell them about the story that has landed in my hand. And I have students coming from everywhere asking about what can they see this journal? How do they turn it in? I said, well, she has no name on it. And we made numerous lessons of inquiry and writing and reflection and calling the police and seeing if we could figure out. It was a very, very powerful learning experience about community. If you didn't shape the story, one formed anyway. It came to me. Whether it's a story about boredom, a story about failure, a story about that this doesn't matter, a story about what happens on a roof when you're not looking. Organizations are no different. Your culture is. If you're not actually actively telling the story, your culture is. And it may not be the one that you want. We need to answer the pulse of story. I tell people opportunity doesn't happen on your schedule. The same is true with stories. We need to listen when they call. We need to look for them in places we don't normally look, even if it's the roof of a school. And most important, we need to listen deeply before we start telling them. There's a proverb that states, tell me a story and it'll live in my heart forever. As educators, we hope our students hold true to what is true, and that truth is often formed around story. As Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. After 30 plus years in education, here's something I can tell you with absolute certainty. Students don't give their best effort to content. They give their best effort to meaning. I had a group of students and we went to the library. Many of these students had never been to the library. They were in high school. We have a high school storytelling troupe. I was the first full-time high school storytelling teacher in the United States. And the Tehachapi Wind Fair, those large wind torrents, called me and said, we'd like your students to tell stories based on the wind. My students didn't care a whit's end about the wind. But they spent 40 minutes looking for folk tales about the wind. And they told, the problem was the wind was so bad we couldn't hear the stories because of those big torrents. But they came together as a community because I invested and said, we can do this together. They lean in, and same for business, when something matters to them. Your employees, your customers, they want to know they are part of the work. They matter. In Zimbabwe, they have a saying that says, instead of hello, they say, I see you, you are here. I want you to think of your whole business as, I see you, you are here, you matter. You're going to help make the advancement of the next step of where we need to be. You are part of the vision. You are part of this story coming together. They are the ones who want to be involved in the process, and we want to make space for them. Let them follow the pulse of the story with you. As chief story officers, help carry meaning to their experience and their story. There's a social psychologist, Jerome Bruner, who said that narrative is an act of meaning. The one who makes the meaning is the storyteller. Steve Jobs says the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. In education, as Annette Simmons said yesterday, complexity is constant. Here's an assignment I give to my undergraduate students. For 15 years, I look at every day differently. I adapt what I call a narrative mindset. Think, act, and respond in story every day for every moment. Now, I don't expect my students to do that all the time, but I do expect them to do it for 3 days. I give them an assignment that they must think, act, and respond in story for 3 days. I remember a young lady, she said, I went to the gas station and I'm extremely an introvert. And you had us do the narrative mindset. And I went in to buy gas and I picked up some Hostess Ho-Hos, like a cupcake. And I turned to the person next to me, and I never talked to anyone, Dr. Cordi. And I said, are these any good? And the senior woman started crying. And she said, those were my son's favorites. She said she sat into that gas station or that petrol station for 40 minutes. She said, I went in wanting gas. I walked out having a new friend. That's what story can do. Well, every morning when I wake up, I think, what story did happen yesterday? What story's going on today? If we put it in a business sense, we need to think in a narrative mind. It should be the first way we think, because the brain logically is made for story. As Lisa Cron says, it is wired for story. And there's actually new research that the stories, the neurocoupling changes the listener's brain, but the newest research is that it even changes the rhythm of the heart. Story changes the brain and the heart. What do you think is more powerful in business and or education? Just to prove that, I'm going to tell you what KB shared. When she did narrative mindset, she said, to create a narrative way of responding, I intentionally shifted from simply answering the prompt to telling a story that reflected my lived experience. Instead of listing facts about my life, I focused on building a timeline that allowed my story to unfold naturally, starting with my early beliefs about myself and then gradually moving into experiences that challenged and reshaped those beliefs. I included vivid, specific moments, like sitting by the window waiting for my dad, or a situation that led to my panic attack, so that the reader could better understand not just what happened, but how that moment felt. Another student, EB, said, adapting a narrative mindset here reflected inward and treated my own discomfort as a story instead of something to drown out or fix. I observed silence in my relationship to it and personified it. I allowed my internal conflict to temporarily resolve, and that shift changed a lot. I became curious about discomfort and reflect on why we need to be uncomfortable sometimes. What surprised me the most was just how dependent I've become on seeking constant stimulation. I never realized how uncomfortable silence made me until I removed all the distractions. From adapting a narrative mindset, and I go around the country showing people how to adapt this narrative mindset, and I show my students, and anyone who talks with me knows that I think, act, and respond in story. Students realize, and you too can, in your business, in your practice, in your self-motivation, and in your life. When things get hard, as Annette Simmons reminded us, you don't remove complexity. And I would like to add, you organize it. And the tool we use for this organization is story. Your organizations are living in complexity right now. Change, uncertainty, too much information. The companies that win are not the ones with the most data. They are the ones that make the clearest sense of it. Zoe also did the narrative mindset, said, this challenge helped slow me down and reminded me that there's beauty in the small moments. This isn't the first time I felt sort of grounded, calm, that I felt while doing this assignment. It isn't the first time I've slowed down like this, but this challenge made me realize how long it had been since I remembered to slow down in such a way. What a great business practice. Slow down. Welsh manager and consultant David Snowden said, if you want to change the world, you have to change the story. If you're selling learning or products, Seth Godin reminds us marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but the stories you tell. In education, real world isn't delivering content. Some people know that I'm the founder of the Story Box, which is a physical box of stories that literally is decorative and travels around the world and the country every 3 weeks, every other year. And I could tell you numerous stories that came from that story box, because it's not about a box of traveling stories. It's about the connections that are being made from them. There was a person in Sweden who had the story box, and she was considered the story ambassador. And she literally had a girl come in and said, I can't come up with the stories, but I made the smallest story box. And it was a little tiny decorated matchbox put into this physical box that was flown to Israel. And Lamar Shaponi in Israel said, I have these boys who really couldn't come up with a story, didn't feel like they owned a story until they saw the little matchbox. They had to make the tiniest stories they could for that matchbox. And the story could end there, but like stories do, they continue. They, in Sweden today, have the Little Matchbox Annual Storytelling Festival. And it didn't stop there. They took the concept of my Storybox project and they put it to the United Nations Geneva Convention for Children's Rights and told the story of the Matchbox and the story from Israel and from all the other stories that are contained. Storytelling is about connecting, and that was one way we connected. It's helping someone to see themselves differently. And once the story changes, everything changes. The box grows, metaphorically or physically. The stories await. Business talk about transformation all the time. But transformation doesn't happen when systems change. It happens when stories change. So you can build your metaphorical or physical story box and watch people add to it, talk about it, build the community. It's not about stories in a box. It's the stories that come from the box experience. So what does all this mean? It means that whether you call it that or not, you already have a chief story officer in your organization. The only question is it intentional or accidental? How much does story direct your business decisions? Or do you follow story scripts that define your business in a way that you don't want it to go? Somebody else made it. Somebody detached from the mission or the value. Let story be your guide and watch the change. I want to end where I started, in a classroom. There's a moment every educator realizes and recognizes. It's subtle. You can't measure it on a test, but you can feel it. I took Jose into schools to tell story, and one was his home school, and he did an amazing performance. And all the teachers marauded me and said, I can't believe that's Jose. He had such a speech impediment problem, we didn't even think he could speak. But I didn't look at that. He did over 300 shows with me. And I said, just don't say no. Listen to his story. So in that moment, the student isn't just learning. He's found his voice. The student has stepped into a new story about who they are and what's possible. I got an email a few years back that Jose was now a U.S. Navy officer. And the email said, I can't tell you where I am, but it's a tough place. He says, I'm in charge of over 30 people. And he said, Mr. Cordi, I use stories to calm them. I use stories to calm them. That's the work. That's not just education, that's leadership. Because every day in your organization, people are deciding, what does this mean? Do I belong in this story? Can I tell my story in this space? And the leaders who can answer those questions clearly, consistently, powerfully are the ones people follow. So after 30 years in education, here's what I learned that matters to business. If you want to change performance, change systems. If you want to change behavior, change incentives. But if you want to change people, change the story. Artem, I'm going to have you put the slides up just very quickly. Maybe. Change the story. So who was your first chief storyteller? Possibly an educator. Give credit. I always tell people, email that person or call that person and say thank you. Think about how your data is there. What is the soundscape of your business? Have you literally walked inside the business and listened to what people see, or are you watching signs that nobody was involved in? And what is the story on the roof of your business? What did you see? Take time to look for the hidden stories and the stories that are right in front of you. Take time to deeply listen to what matters. And sometimes it's not what you heard. And what happens when you chase the wind? I remember when they built the iPhone, I read that they had 2 weeks just to do anything but play. I've written a book on play. But the first thing that you want to do is have permission to freely explore. Chase the wind, and you will find more stories come back. Don't always go to the places. It's like when people write a script, they're handcuffed to the words. Allow yourself to do what I call word dance so that you find the story that you want. And what happens when you employ a narrative mindset? Like I do for my own students, I employ upon you. I challenge you. I invite you. As much as it's a challenge, it's an invitation. Just take 48 hours to think, act, and respond in story. This includes a silly prompt that I gave them was follow an animal for a day. It was silly. I didn't mean anything by it. But I got beautiful stories about rabbits and horses and what they think and what their values are and their ethical reasoning. And then I say, if you heard something that was boring, re-story it back. If only answer in story instead of someone saying, how are you? Tell the story. Really deeply center and listen. Go to story places where you think stories might happen and might not happen. It's an amazing journey of joy. And what happens when stories are placed in a box? They just stay in a box. But when you build community around the stories that are contained in spaces that are inviting spaces where narrative happens. But here's a critical point. Narrative is about listening as well as telling. It matters, but it's also about the environment and the space for listening and telling to happen. Too often we privilege the idea of we're just talking and telling that story, when the beauty comes from listening to the immense joy and wonder and direction that comes from really deeply listening, not just hearing. Invite spaces to change the story. It's time to change the narrative. Think exactly of what you want, but then be open to the fact of change. It has been an immense joy to be here and to share with you, and I've learned so much. And Artem, thank you again.
Yes, the pleasure is all ours. The fire keeps on burning throughout your talk and right now. And Karen Dietz is sharing, my favorite quote so far is, people don't buy what they do, they buy why you do it. And I second Mary Alice's comment on how brain decides what's important through the story. I love that. You brought so many interesting ideas to us. Maybe if anyone has the questions, please write them in the chat. And I have one straight off the bat. You've shared how working with people in the classroom was alike to what you see later on in organizations. But maybe there's something you saw in the organization first, and then you thought to yourself, man, I saw exactly this happen in my classroom. I know exactly what to do. Maybe something comes to mind.
So for some reason, I think about the two different principles that we have within the context of the school, and you talked about in the organizations. In businesses, it is a practice to get together and, in good business, to merge and really appreciate and value each other's ideas and share them back and forth. You literally have a table that's called a conference table. That's not often in the school. I had two different kinds of principles. I had one principle that come in straight to the business of what's going on that's wrong or that's something that we have to change immediately. And I had another principle that started every day with, anytime we met, with appreciations for who we were and the value of what we've done. And I've seen that in good business practices. I've had the great fortune to work with everything from restored citizens to major businesses. And I like to see the practices where they have dedicated space to say, let's come up with ideas together.
Love it. Those places are very vibrant and create an atmosphere for great stories. That's true. Awesome. While we're waiting for more questions in the chat, I'm going to go for a traditional question here. So, Kevin, there are countless ways of using stories in an organization. If there was only one way you could use it for like solving one task, or maybe in the classroom, by the way, what would that one task be?
So I kind of alluded to it. Dedicated spaces for listening. That it happens every day, 2 or 3 times. And it starts with 3 different things. The feedback. We get too many critics. I think the most powerful things that you can ask in story are these 3 things. I wonder, imagine, and have you considered? You keep the agency, but it allows you to go different directions. I do see a question, Artem, and I read it, and they ask about what were the stories I grew up with. The resident storyteller in my home at 86 years old is still my mother. She was born in West Virginia, and every day we would only travel to West Virginia when I lived in Ohio. And I thought the only place in the world was West Virginia because that's what I heard about every day. And so I grew up with those stories. But I also, and she's amazing, and she's still the resident storyteller. And I appreciate, Michelle, that question. But in addition to that, I also was reading comic books. Spider-Man saved me kind of thing. And when I was in kindergarten, I was a 6th grade reader. And I believe the far and the imaginary allows us to reach the possible and the probable. The brain acts as if the fiction is real. And so when we read fiction, our responses are into the probable or possible realms. So I think that's really helped me within the context of story.
Awesome. You can already see the fires burning. I guess they're like a symbol of a good reply. That's great. Like a question just popped into my mind. I guess it's somehow related to the educational sphere, but in our early childhood, it's way easier for us to think of stories. Of course, it's the atmosphere is good. And one of the reasons for me is because we have the permission to imagine something. We can create visuals in our mind. And when we grow up, we just tend to forget it. I don't know who this quote belongs to, but it goes something like, we don't stop playing because we grow up. We grow up because we stop playing. So that's like vice versa. And I believe this ability to imagine is like an ultimate thing we can remember from our childhood and bring back to play in adulthood. What are some other abilities of kids that could really help, we could really remember rather than learn, in your opinion, to help us work with stories and tell stories?
First, I'm going to anchor on what you've already said. Albert Einstein said play is the highest form of research. The highest form of research. And we say things like, quit playing around, when we should be saying play as much as you can, because it is not a rehearsal for life. It's where you get to review, re-see, rethink, re-energize, and reformulate is in play. It's where it happens again in different ways. What we need to concentrate on, that we've learned as children, is focusing more on what's being said by others before we speak. Also, that our minds are imaginative. We, instead of quick to respond, we should imagine our responses, especially when building story. I read that recently by Milbury Birch somewhere, who's written some great stuff on story. But the imagination is extremely powerful. And then we also have to remember that the classroom isn't for answers, it's for questions and discovery. And sometimes you get answers as a result. But we need, as educators and as business people, to always remember that rich value of the unanswered, the complexity, and explore that. Too often, I have seen businesses make formulas that say this will work all times, all the time. It doesn't. The beauty is the break. The beauty is when it doesn't work and you have to explore it different ways. The complexity can really help you address it if you are addressing complexity in your mind on a continuous sense, heart and mind.
Love it. It's really way more important to sit with complexity than to straightforwardly find an answer. That's great. That's awesome. We have one more question from Mary Alice, and I'm really intrigued by this one. You were the first storytelling teacher. What advice would you give to someone determined to be the first person working with stories in their organization?
Well, first shout out to Mary Alice. She lives here in my hometown, and we are in gracious. It is great that she's here, and we are overdue to get together. A great question. The very first thing that I would say is we privilege storytelling sometimes, but story making is quintessential. How we get to the story is often the greater part of getting the story there. And as teachers, we need to come into listening spaces and that it can be moved into organizational practices is literally have dedicated story space, not in the sense of a performance space, but in deep listening and even working with Imagine, I Wonder, and Have You Considered, where even if you think that the project is completely done or that this is the best way to get customers, open story space to help put it full circle or open it up so that it can be invited more. We literally need to, that little round carpet in the classroom has a space in the business room. And we need to, without evaluation and judgment, but in the spirit of discovery, bring the carpet in the business room.
Absolutely love it. I'm now thinking about where do I get the carpet and where can I place it. That's a lovely metaphor. Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing your wisdom to us. I'm in awe, honestly. Yeah, it's been great.
Arden, thank you for bringing the community together, and I look forward to. If I can help anyone, many people have helped me along the journey, and they're even here. But Arden, thank you for championing people so that their voices are heard, voices that we don't normally hear and voices that we do. So thank you for that invitation. I'm glad to be part of that community.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is all mine. All right. We'll be moving on and we'll get back together quite soon. So don't leave us for too long because we are having a panel discussion a bit later in the evening. But before we get to that,